I remember hearing a story about a boy that wanted to see the transformation of a caterpillar into a butterfly. And so he got this caterpillar and he kept it in his room, and over time the caterpillar started creating a cocoon. And before the boy knew it, there was a full-on cocoon in his room where he was keeping this caterpillar. And some time had passed and he noticed that the caterpillar, now the butterfly, was starting to break through the cocoon, and he was so excited. But he saw the butterfly struggling, and he saw the butterfly wasn't getting out as quick as he wanted the butterfly to get out. So he went and got a pair of scissors and he wanted to help the butterfly get out. So as the butterfly was still struggling, he gets the scissors and he cuts just a little slit in the cocoon, and then the butterfly comes out. He looks at the table where he was, and he thought that the butterfly would just fly away and that it would be like this magical, cool moment. But the butterfly never flew away. And in fact, the rest of its life, the butterfly never flew, and it had a swollen body. The boy learned afterwards that what makes butterflies able to fly is the struggle to get out of the cocoon, and the struggle helps them develop muscles and everything they need so they could fly. The boy had good intentions, but the boy didn't allow the butterfly to struggle through that process, and because of that, the butterfly didn't become all it was intended to become. Now, we've talked about the fact that we all have struggles. We've talked about just wrong ways to handle struggles, or just ways that aren't the most effective. And what we really want to do in this series is look at some specific struggles. And you might be struggling with pride, you might be struggling with envy, you might be struggling with lust, you might be struggling with anger, you might be struggling with who knows, whatever it is. But we want to help you in this video with whatever struggle you are, to give you some practical ways of how you could work through that struggle so that you could have a more fulfilling life with the Lord.
That's right, Brian. So in order to do this, we're going to set up the idea here that it's actually a sign of strength to lean into these struggles. That whatever it is that was on that list, or maybe there's something that wasn't on that list that you know in your heart of hearts is going on, that it's really a sign of bravery and strength to lean into that. And right now we're going to go over some ways you can actually do the leaning in process. So let me set up a scenario for you. I want to set up a scenario where you've got this friend and you two have spent some time together, and what you find is that when you get together, that you enjoy it, but then there's some aspect that isn't as gratifying. Maybe you find that the two of you kind of get into trouble, get into mischief, whatever it may be, gossiping. Anytime you get together, all of a sudden it becomes really biting or sarcastic, or talking about other people behind their backs. Maybe there's some just integrity and morality things that come up when you guys get together. Maybe there's just some activities that you do that when you're together with this friend, it's kind of a go-to. And so you're in a rut, you're hanging out with this friend, but deep down you know there's something that's not quite right. How do you get to a place where really change can happen? Well, the first method that we're going to talk about is a way to change your game plan. And this is a 7-step method. It's 7 steps. It's a lot of steps. But I'm going to walk you through them, and we're going to look at how these steps can help you change your game plan. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at what is going on inside of your heart. It's really what this step is called, is owning what's there, owning what's yours. So we're going to look at that. That's the second part. And then the third approach is going to be related to just monitoring your connection with God. What happens to your connection with God when you're with this friend doing whatever it is that ends up making you feel like there's something that you need to address. So without any further ado, let's just dive right into the first method. So what we're really hoping to do here is to help you develop a process of discernment through which you can lean into struggles. All right, so we set up the scenario. You've got this friend. There's some stuff that goes on when you're together that isn't quite great, and you're wanting to address that. So this first approach that we're going to talk through is a 6-step process. So bear with me, there's a lot of steps, and what you would do is have on a piece of paper and get them all, have a piece of paper with these all written down, and you'd go through them one by one. It's really helpful to do this with a friend or a counselor or someone in leadership, pastor of some sort. So, first step is, what is the problem? So you got this friend, you know, you can kind of bat it around a little bit, and you clarify the problem is this: I want to create a more God-honoring relationship. Okay, that's pretty clear. We can do something with that. So let's look at the second step. You've got your problem. Step 2 is writing down, what have I done already to try to make that happen? So let's just say, for the sake of the example, you really haven't given this too much thought. Just an issue that's coming up. So you really haven't tried anything quite yet. If you had tried some things, you would just write those down under step 2. So we're going to jump to step 3 now. In step 3, you know, you may have some things in your mind that you have thought of, but you have not yet tried. And so that's what you write down in step 3. For example, let's say for this, you've thought of, there's a part of you that's like, I'm just going to bail on this friendship. That would just make this whole thing go away, make the problem disappear. So that's one option that you've thought of. But then there's the other side of you that's like, no, that's not the right thing to do. You can't bail on a friend. Let's talk to this friend. Let's just see if we can have a conversation around it. So just write them down. Not making any decisions. We just want you to write them down. The next step is the step, and this is step 4. This is the step where you're gonna think of some new things. And this is especially helpful to have somebody around who can maybe jog your thoughts and contribute some of their own. And it's really important to be receptive to what others might have. Again, we're not judging, we're just trying to get a list of things that we can possibly evaluate. Any thoughts?
Yeah, this would be a good time to talk to a trusted friend who you could confide in, and they know, and you know that you can trust with, you know, them with the information. And it would be also to talk to a professor or a mentor of some sort to really get some clarification with what's going on, if you really want to honor the Lord with this friendship.
Great. Those are 2 really good, really specific ideas. So we've gone through the first 4 steps. We've brainstormed 4 possible options, and now we're going to go through each one of those options one at a time. So let's take the first one. Let's say it's going to be, I'm going to dump the friendship. Okay, in step 5, it's pros and cons. So what would be a pro of dumping the friendship?
A pro dumping the friendship is, now you don't have to worry about dishonoring the Lord with the actions the 2 of you do, they do when they're together. So that'd be the pro. The con would be, you have a friend saying, wait a minute, we were best friends, we were very close, and all of a sudden they just dropped me.
So in essence, it solves the problem really quick, but it creates this rift and leaves a really bad taste in somebody's mouth. So
yeah.
Okay, so you got pro and con of that one. If you were actually doing this, you would probably come up with a list of some other pros and some other cons. You probably are thinking of some right now. Now, let's take the second option. You just go directly to this friend and say, hey, I got to talk to you. What would be a pro and a con of that?
The pro of going to the friend directly is that there's no miscommunication. There's no, hey, I'm just going to sidestep the situation. It's being direct with it. The con is that the friend might take it in the wrong manner and might be hurt when you talk to them.
Yeah, so there's some risks in that, but then it has some benefits that maybe the other one doesn't have. Okay, so Bryan, you came up with 2 other really great opportunities, or great ideas. I think the first one that you mentioned was talking to a trusted friend. Let's say you've got some other friends in the group. What would be a pro of talking to one or more friends about this?
Talking to more friends is a good idea because you get different perspectives.
That can really open up the horizons. Con?
The con is it could be seen as gossiping, you could get 4, 5, or 6 different perspectives as well.
Okay, so that can be challenging. Then the last option was not including friends, but going to somebody like a mentor, pastor, counselor. Pro with that.
The pro with that is you go to someone who has wisdom, who has training in this, and who, generally speaking, is objective.
Okay. Any cons?
I think a con could be is sometimes all you could do sometimes is talk to the person and talk to that trusted person, and you could almost use it as a way of avoiding the situation.
So you kind of talk and talk and talk.
And there's no action.
Yeah, I could see that. So after you've gone through these steps, you can kind of get the picture that this is clarifying, and when it's really on a paper right in front of you, it's a lot better. What we tend to find is that people get stuck in steps 1 and 2, and there's this loop, and you go around it and around it and around it, and you don't end up getting anywhere. So this is a really good way to invite somebody into your process and to go through a systematic evaluation method. And at the end, you got those options, you got your pros and cons, and the last step is evaluating those using a discernment process, and then making a final decision and implementing that. Now, we want to emphasize these are some strategies, some tools that you can use, and they rely on you going through certain steps. The reality is, God is with us throughout all these steps. The scriptures are pretty clear that growth in the Christian life is a two-way process. God's involved in shaping us, and we are involved in being shaped. And so, as you go through those steps, including God in those, in your process of discernment, is something we can't tell you how to do because it really is up to you. But that is a super crucial and important aspect to include in this. So the next strategy that we're going to teach you to lean into your struggles, and again, courage and kudos to you for doing this. This is probably the hardest part, to be honest. It's about owning what's yours in this issue. And here's the deal. We know what we're not supposed to do. We know what we're supposed to do up here. But it's down here that we really need to connect with. And this is the part where it can get messy. Our faith, our lives, we don't really know, if we're honest with ourselves, why we do certain things that we do, or why we can't stop certain things that we can't stop. So I know that's really big, but let me try to filter it down a little bit. So you got this friend, you're trying to be more God-honoring with them, and it seems like you two get into some problems. Well, in this step, what we're going to ask you to do is look at what is it about the situation that keeps you coming back. When I talk to students who are trying to quit something like smoking weed, they know they're not supposed to do it. They know it's getting them into trouble. And they are always surprised when the first question I ask them is, what do you like about it? What's good about it? They're like, well, what do you mean? I need to stop. You don't understand. I need to stop. No, I understand. I do understand that you need to stop. What we need to do is understand the part of you that keeps going back to it. And that's where it gets tough to look in, because that's where it gets ugly. See, when we're saying, oh, I got this friend, and oh, they drag me into this stuff, well, that makes it all their problem, right? But there's something about you that takes you back there. So we want to ask, what is it? Does it make me feel better? Does it take my mind off of things, off of anxiety, off of worries? What is it that's going on? Do I feel a sense of connection? Let's say it's a gossipy kind of a thing. Does that help you feel connected? Is it a way of getting anger out, and it just feels good to be angry, and you know you're not supposed to, but if you're really honest with yourself, there's just that root of bitterness. Well, why do we want to do this? Isn't this just focusing on the problem? We want to focus on a solution, not on the problem. Well, it's a good objection, but in reality, that stuff that we're getting down to the core of is the stuff that God needs to be a part of. That's the stuff that needs healing. That's the stuff that needs to be touched by God's grace. That's the stuff that needs forgiveness. And when we're honest with ourselves about that, that's really the first step to growth. And so that's why this is such a hard step, because it looks at what's kind of ugly about us, but why it's such an important step. The biggest block to this is how we treat ourselves in the imperfection gap. The imperfection gap is the gap between where you are and where you want to be, where you need to be, where you feel like this is where I should be. Now, we all as kids did things that were wrong, and when we were kids and we did things that were wrong, people would react to us. And that is a lot of where we get how we treat ourselves in that gap of imperfection. So when you find yourself maybe critical, like, oh, I didn't do it, I did it again, or oh, I didn't make the cut, and you kind of smack yourself with a stick, that's that critical voice that comes out. That makes it really hard to own what's yours. Sometimes we get down on ourselves, we get really blamey, and instead of being angry, we can get kind of depressed and dejected, like, oh man, I messed up again. This is just so me, I'm never gonna get any better. Well, that's another way to treat yourself in that imperfection gap that is a barrier to getting down to what really needs to be touched and healed by God's grace. What we really need to do in that imperfection gap is just keep this quote in mind. Imagine somebody is talking to you and you're sharing life stuff and you confide in them something that's really going on. And imagine they use your name and they say, hey, I love you just the way you are, but I love you too much to let you stay that way. And what you feel in that voice is an understanding, it's a compassion, it's an invitation to share more. It's not critical, it's not angry, it's not blaming. If that gap can be filled with that kind of a graceful response, you will feel safer and you will be able to go to depths that you have not been before. And those are the depths that God can touch in ways that He has never been able to touch before. So we hope that up to this point, these first two specific strategies have been helpful. We're now at our third and final strategy for leaning into struggles. This strategy is keeping track of your relationship with the Lord. Well, what does that mean? Well, let's take our example. When you're out with this friend, maybe it's hard for you to connect with God during that time, especially if it's something that you know is not God-honoring. So how do you stay connected to the Lord in the midst of those times and in the midst of the struggles? Well, here's the reality. Anytime we do something that introduces some rift in a relationship, makes somebody upset, hurts somebody's feelings, anytime that happens, we can do one of two things. We can either move closer to them or we can move further away from them. Let's start with that one first. It's so tempting to move further away because we feel bad, we feel guilty. And so if I do something that's offensive or that hurts somebody, oh man, it's kind of easier to just get some space. I don't want to acknowledge what I've done. It's just really hard to do. So that's really tempting, but that's moving away, and that's really focusing on me and my own feelings of guilt and imperfection. Remember that imperfection gap and see if you can even tell yourself that you love yourself in the midst of this. How do you move closer to somebody? You move closer to them by focusing not on yourself, but on them. So let's say again, trying to be God-honoring. God's the one who maybe you feel like you've hurt God, you've offended God. Imagining what God's response to you would be, the invitation that God would have for you. That's the key to moving closer and keeping that relational connection in the midst of your imperfections. See, the narrative of the scriptures is all about people who have messed up. The ironic thing is that we so often try to get ourselves all put together perfectly before we go to God. That's not the narrative of Scripture, that's not the narrative of your life, and that's not the power of the gospel. So let's keep in mind that when we're in touch with our vulnerabilities, with our hurts, with the things that we've done that aren't great, those are the times that we can be most open to God's grace and forgiveness in our lives.
And as we're drawing closer to the Lord, understand who we are, that we're created in the image of God, that there's a uniqueness about us. And so He allows us to draw near to Him in our struggles, in our imperfections. And He says, come to me just as you are. You are loved, you are valued, you are cherished. Always remember that, because God wants you. And He is calling out for you. And it's like the story of the prodigal son. The Lord has His arms wide open saying, come to me. And so that's our challenge for you, is to run to the Lord, and He will embrace you, and He will be with you throughout your struggles.